When people think of avoidance, the first assumption is always rejection. They pulled back, they went cold, they must not care. That's the surface story, but it's not the truth. If an avoidant really didn't care, you wouldn't get tested at all. You'd get indifference, a closed door, silence that isn't strategic, but final. What most people don't understand is the very fact that you're experiencing their push and pull is not a sign of disinterest. It's a confirmation of attachment. It's the smoke that tells you the fire of love is already burning, even if it's hidden beneath layers of fear. Think about it this way. We don't test what we don't value. Nobody's stress tests a chair they're about to throw away. We test the chair we want to sit in for the long haul, because we need to know if it can hold our weight. Avoidants, deep in their psychology, operate by the same principle. When they start to care, when they start to feel the terrifying weight of love pressing on their chest, that's when the testing begins. The distance, the hesitation, the emotional games. Those aren't rejections. They're checks, examinations, silent questions. Is this safe for me? Will this person hold when I lean? Now, the mistake most people make is misinterpreting this behavior as a final verdict instead of a diagnostic. When they pull away, you panic. When they go quiet, you chase. When they question, you over-explain. And what happens? You fail the test without even realizing it because you treated it like abandonment instead of proof of investment. An avoidant doesn't test the people they don't love. They only test the ones who've penetrated the armor, the ones who've made it past their defenses, the ones who now carry the potential to wound them. And this is where the paradox of love collides with the psychology of avoidance. Love, for them, is not a safe haven at first. It's a battlefield. Every moment of closeness feels like walking toward a cliff. They're terrified of falling off. So what do? They build traps along the way, not to destroy you, but to measure you, to measure whether you'll shove them off the cliff, or hold their hand and walk with them without forcing them over the edge. That's why they'll create distance, because they want to see if your connection survives space. That's why they'll go silent, because they want to know if your presence is dependent on noise or if you can sit steady in the quiet. Here's what you need to understand. Rejection is final. Testing is hopeful. When they test you, it means they're still negotiating with themselves. They're asking, can I trust this love? Can I risk it all here? It means the door is still open, even if it looks half shut. And when you learn to recognize this, you stop panicking. You stop personalizing their fear. You stop collapsing under the weight of their silence. And instead, you stand tall, unmoved, grounded. And in that moment, you're not just passing their test. You're rewriting their blueprint of love. You see, every avoidant carries a hidden contradiction. They crave intimacy as much as they fear it. And testing is the bridge between those two poles. It's their way of saying, I want to move toward you, but I need to know I won't drown when I do. It's not cruelty. It's self-preservation. And if you can hold that perspective, you stop seeing their behavior as an insult and start seeing it as evidence. Evidence that love is already alive inside them. Evidence that you matter more than they want to admit. Now, does that mean you should tolerate disrespect, manipulation, or endless cycles of withdrawal? Absolutely not. But it does mean you need to read the behavior correctly. Don't confuse testing with rejection. Don't confuse fear with indifference. Because if you miss this distinction, you'll respond from insecurity instead of strength, and that response will only confirm their worst fears. But if you meet their testing with calmness, with self-respect, with unshakable grounding, something shifts. They begin to see you not as a threat to their freedom, but as the one person who can hold space for their vulnerability without exploiting it. That's the power hidden inside their tests. They are not trying to destroy the connection. They are trying to protect themselves while still keeping the connection alive. And if you can grasp that, really grasp it, you start to see they're pulling back, not as the end of love, but as the very sign that love is beginning to take root. So the next time an avoidant tests you, remember this, they don't test the disposable. They only test the essential. And the very fact that you are being tested is the proof you were searching for all along. If they're testing you, it means they're already in love. The question is, can you hold steady enough to let them see it? One of the greatest misunderstandings about avoidance is the meaning behind their push and pull. People take it personally. They think, they don't want me, they don't love me, they're pushing me away because I'm not enough. But that's not the truth. The push-pull dynamic is not about rejection. It's about measurement. It's about the avoidant's desperate need to know if the ground they're standing on with you is solid or if it's about to collapse underneath them. See, avoidants are not reckless with their hearts. They're cautious, hyper-vigilant, always scanning for signs of danger. Their entire nervous system has been wired to expect abandonment on one side and suffocation on the other. They live in this tension. If I let you too close, you'll control me. If I lean too much, you'll leave me. That's the paradox they carry into love. So when they test you, when they pull away after giving you closeness, they're not doing it to play games. They're doing it because deep down they're asking, can I trust you with both my closeness and my distance? Can you be stable when I'm unstable? Think about that for a second. Every push, every retreat, every mixed signal is really a measurement of your stability. They're not looking for perfection, but they are looking for resilience. Because to an avoidant, love is terrifyingly unstable. Their whole life has shown them that closeness either hurts or disappears, so they don't trust love to last. That's why they push, not because they don't want you, but because they're trying to see if you can hold steady in the storm that lives inside them. Now, here's the critical insight. How you respond to that push determines everything. If you panic, chase, and collapse, you've confirmed their fear. You've shown them that love equals pressure, that intimacy equals chaos. But if you remain grounded, if you stay calm and secure, even when they withdraw, you've just passed the test. You've shown them that you can hold your own emotional balance, that you won't crumble under the weight of their fear. And that's when they start to relax. That's when the walls they've built start to come down. This is why avoidants don't fall in love with people who need them too much. They fall in love with people who can stand strong without demanding their every breath. Because what they're really measuring in those moments of distance is your capacity to hold your own center. They're asking, if I give you less for a while, will you implode? Or will you continue to thrive independent of my validation? And when you show them that your worth isn't dependent on their constant attention, their fear slowly gives way to trust. Let's be real, this is uncomfortable. Nobody likes being tested. Nobody likes dealing with inconsistency. But the truth is, this isn't about you being manipulated. This is about you being evaluated. It's about an avoidant, terrified of being trapped or abandoned, trying to figure out if you're the exception. The one who won't suffocate them when they're close and won't abandon them when they pull away. They're not looking for you to be perfect. They're looking for you to be steady. And steadiness, to them, is the most attractive quality in the world. What happens if you pass this test? What happens if you hold steady when they push back? Slowly, they begin to trust. Slowly, the distance they create becomes shorter, the silence less threatening, the closeness less terrifying. They start to see that you're not like the people who wounded them before. They start to believe that maybe, just maybe, love doesn't have to equal loss. And that shift doesn't happen overnight. But it begins with how you handle the push. Now, don't mistake this for tolerating endless games or disrespect. Passing their test isn't about sacrificing your needs or walking on eggshells. It's about embodying emotional independence. It's about showing them you can respect their space without losing your power, and you can welcome closeness without clinging. That balance is what rewires their entire experience of love. So the next time you feel the push, don't panic. Recognize it for what it is, a test of your stability. Recognize that it's not an ending, it's an invitation to prove that you can love without losing yourself and stand strong without chasing approval. Because when you meet that push with strength instead of fear, you do more than just pass their test. You give them the one thing they've secretly been searching for their entire life, the experience of safety and love. And that's the moment an avoidant starts to fall, not just into love, but into trust. When they push, they're not trying to drive you away. They're trying to find out if you'll still be standing when the dust settles. Because only then will they finally believe love is safe. Silence is one of the most misunderstood behaviors of the avoidant. To most people, silence feels like rejection, like indifference, like the end. But when it comes to avoidance, silence is rarely the absence of feeling. In fact, silence is often the loudest proof of how much they're feeling. It's their ultimate test. Not of you shouting back, not of you filling the gap with endless words, but of whether you can hold steady in the space where their fear speaks louder than their voice. Let's be honest. We live in a world that panics at silence. When the texts stop, when the calls go unanswered, when the room gets quiet, the mind races. Did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I reach out more? But here's what you need to understand. An avoidant doesn't go silent when they don't care. They go silent when they care too much. Silence is their self-protection, their way of regulating the overwhelming intensity of connection. It's not that they don't want you. It's that wanting you terrifies them, and silence gives them space to breathe. But this is where the test begins. In that silence, they're not just calming themselves. They're watching you. Not consciously, not like a manipulative strategy, but instinctively. They're observing, can you handle this quiet, or will you unravel? Because to them, your response to their silence tells them everything about your stability, everything about your security, everything about whether love with you will suffocate or support them. Here's the paradox: silence for them isn't about punishing you. It's about protecting the fragile parts of themselves that don't know how to exist in constant closeness. Imagine a flame that's too strong for its own wick. They pull back, not to extinguish the flame, but to prevent it from burning out completely. And if you chase that silence with panic, if you bombard them with words, if you demand answers, all you've done is confirm their deepest fear. That intimacy means pressure, that love means losing their breath. But if you can hold that silence without collapsing, if you can respect the space without doubting your worth, something extraordinary happens. You communicate without a single word. The one thing they crave more than anything else: safety. You show them that your love isn't dependent on constant reassurance, that you can stand strong without their every text, that you're not going to explode just because they needed to retreat. That steadiness becomes magnetic. It disarms their defenses. It proves you can love them without consuming them. And here's the deeper layer most people miss: silence is not emptiness. Silence is filled with meaning. For an avoidant, silence is where their battles take place. It's where they wrestle with their fear of intimacy, their terror of abandonment, their longing for closeness they're too afraid to ask for. When they go quiet, they're not thinking, I don't want you. They're thinking, can I handle this? Can I survive wanting you without losing myself? And in that crucible, the way you respond determines whether they find peace or confirm their panic. This is why patience is not weakness in love with an avoidant. Patience is strength. Silence is their way of setting the stage, and your role is not to rush the scene, but to hold your place with calm presence. That doesn't mean you tolerate endless absence or betray your own needs. It means you understand the silence for what it is, a test of steadiness. And you respond not from insecurity, but from strength. And when you do, when you pass that test, slowly silence transforms. It stops being a wall and starts becoming a bridge. The gaps shrink, the communication grows, the connection deepens. Because once they see you can handle the silence, they start to believe maybe they don't need the silence as much. Maybe closeness isn't so dangerous after all. Maybe love can breathe without destroying them. But if you fail, if you react with desperation, if you let fear take the wheel, then silence confirms every nightmare they've ever carried. That intimacy will cost them their peace. That loving you will trap them. That opening up will only lead to pain. And so they retreat further, not because they don't feel, but because they feel too much. The choice is always there to interpret silence as rejection, or to recognize it as the loudest test of love, to collapse into fear, or to stand in calm strength. And your choice doesn't just change the dynamic, it rewires the way they experience intimacy itself. So when the silence comes, and it will, don't fear it. Don't chase it. Don't let it define your worth. See it for what it is, their way of asking, can I trust you in the quiet? Can I be safe with you when my voice disappears? And if you can meet that silence with confidence, then what was once their greatest fear becomes the very ground where love begins to grow. Because in the end, silence isn't absence. For an avoidant, silence is proof. And if you can hold steady in that proof, you've already won the test. One of the greatest misconceptions about love is the idea that if you want someone, you need to constantly prove it by showing how much you need them. But that's exactly what repels an avoidant. Neediness doesn't draw them in, it drives them out. They don't test whether you need them. They test whether you can live without them. That's the paradox. The very thing most people think will keep an avoidant close, dependency, is the exact thing that makes them retreat. Think about it. If someone's entire nervous system has been wired to equate intimacy with suffocation, what's the one thing they'll fear most? That your happiness, your stability, your very sense of self will become dependent on them. For an avoidant, that feels like a cage closing in. That's why their tests are never about how much you love them. They already feel that. Their tests are about whether you can remain whole without needing them to fill the gaps in your life. When they pull away, when they withdraw, when they stop giving you attention, they're silently asking, will you lose yourself when I step back? Will you crumble because you made me the center of your universe? Or will you continue to stand strong, continue to live your life, continue to thrive without leaning entirely on me? That's the test, not your affection, not your loyalty, your independence. And here's the truth most people don't want to face. Love without independence is dependency, not intimacy. If you collapse every time they retreat, you're not loving them, you're clinging to them. And an avoidant will never feel safe in that dynamic because it confirms their fear that being loved means being consumed. But if you can show them, not in words but in action, that your world doesn't stop spinning when they take space, you instantly shift the entire dynamic. You become the rare person who proves love can exist without possession, intimacy without suffocation. This is why avoidants fall hardest for people who carry their own sense of identity, who have their own mission, their own passions, their own center of gravity. They don't want to be your air supply, they want to be your partner. They don't want you to dissolve into them, they want you to stand beside them. And every withdrawal, every silence, every moment of distance is their way of measuring whether you have that strength. So how do most people fail this test? By panicking, by begging for reassurance, by over-explaining, over-texting, overreaching. And in doing so, they communicate, I can't survive without you. You are my oxygen. To an avoidant, that isn't love. That's pressure. That's a weight they cannot carry. And so they retreat further, not because they don't feel love, but because they feel trapped by your dependence on them for your identity. But when you pass this test, when you show them that you are whole and complete with, or without their constant attention, something incredible happens. their fear begins to dissolve. They start to relax in your presence because they realize loving you doesn't mean losing themselves. They begin to see that closeness with you doesn't equal captivity, and that intimacy doesn't require them to sacrifice their individuality. This is why emotional independence is so magnetic. It's not about coldness, it's not about pretending not to care, and it's not about playing games. It's about carrying yourself with such grounded confidence that your happiness is not dependent on their every move. You're not waiting by the phone. You're not collapsing when they go silent. You're living, growing, moving, thriving. And when they see that, they're drawn closer because you've become the one person who proves that intimacy can coexist with freedom. And let me tell you, that's what avoidants crave more than anything. Freedom within love. They don't want to be needed like a crutch. They want to be wanted like a choice. They want to know that you can breathe on your own, that you can survive on your own, that you can thrive on your own. And yet you still choose them. That choice, that voluntary, independent, grounded love is what makes them lower their guard. So when they test your independence, it's not to punish you. It's to protect themselves from being consumed. It's their way of asking, will I lose myself if I love you, or can I finally be free in love? And your response determines everything. If you meet that test with desperation, you confirm their fears. If you meet it with strength, you disarm them completely. Here's the final truth. Avoidants don't want to be your world. They want to walk beside you in a world that's already full. They don't want you to collapse into them. They want you to expand with them. And if you can embody that independence, if you can stand strong in your own power while inviting them into your life, you give them the one thing no one else ever has, the freedom to love without fear. Because in the end, they're not testing how much you need them. They're testing whether your love is strong enough to stand without it. At the core of every avoidant is a paradox. They crave love and fear it at the same time. They want closeness more than anything, but they've been conditioned to expect that closeness will eventually bring pain. So when they fall in love, their nervous system goes into overdrive. Every interaction with you becomes a subconscious test, not of whether you're attractive, not of whether you're interesting, but of whether you'll confirm their deepest fears or finally disprove them. That's the hidden truth. Every avoidant carries a script written by their past. If I get too close, I'll lose myself. If I open up, I'll be rejected. If I depend on love, it will eventually leave me. That script lives in their body, in their reflexes, in the way they retreat when things get too intense. And when they test you, what they're really doing is holding your love up against that script. They're asking, will this person replay the same story I've always lived, or will this be different? Think about that. Every moment of distance, every silence, every withdrawal isn't random. It's a simulation. They are setting the stage to see what role you'll play. Will you be the one who pressures them, proving their fear of suffocation, right? Or will you abandon them when they pull away, proving their fear of rejection, right? Or will you do the rare thing, stand steady, calm, present, and begin to rewrite their entire story of love? This is why avoidants appear contradictory. They want closeness, then push it away. They want independence, then panic when they feel alone. It's not because they don't know what they want. It's because they're terrified of finding out if what they want will destroy them. Their whole nervous system is wired for survival, and love feels like the most dangerous battlefield of all. So they test. They test not because they don't feel, but because they feel so much. And their tests are not about your affection, they're about your impact. Do you amplify their fear, or do you create trust? Let me put it plainly. If your reaction to their fear-driven behaviors is panic, overreaction, or pressure, you've just confirmed their worst nightmare. You've proven that intimacy equals chaos. But if your reaction is grounded strength, calm reassurance, and emotional independence, You've given them something they've rarely ever experienced, the possibility of safety and closeness. That moment, when they realize love doesn't have to mean fear, is the turning point. And here's where it gets even deeper. Every avoidant is secretly waiting for someone who won't trigger their defenses. Someone who doesn't collapse when they step back. Someone who doesn't demand their constant validation. Someone who can hold space for their fear without making it their own. That's not weakness. That's not passivity. That's power. Because in that moment, you're showing them a version of love they never believed could exist. Love that doesn't suffocate, love that doesn't abandon, love that doesn't confirm their old wounds, but begins to heal them. This is the hardest test of all, because it's not about words. You can't talk your way into trust with an avoidant. You can't convince them with promises. They don't believe words because their history has been full of broken ones. What they believe is behavior. What they believe is consistency. What they believe is whether, when they push you away, you stand strong instead of shattering. That's when they start to realize, maybe I can trust this. Maybe love doesn't have to be a trap. Maybe this time is different. Now, I need to make something clear. This doesn't mean you tolerate endless games or diminish your own needs just to accommodate their fears. That's not love, that's self-betrayal. Passing their test doesn't mean abandoning yourself. It means anchoring yourself so deeply in your own worth that you don't get swept away by their fear. You stay grounded, and in that groundedness, you become the one thing they've been searching for but never found, that stability. And when they feel that stability, their entire nervous system begins to rewire. What once triggered fear now begins to trigger trust. What once felt like danger begins to feel like safety. And when an avoidant starts to feel safe, everything changes. They stop testing. They stop pulling away as much. They start leaning in, not because they've stopped fearing intimacy, but because you've shown them it's possible to experience intimacy without losing themselves. That shift is the doorway to real love. So the question isn't just, are they testing me? The real question is, what am I showing them when they test me? Do your actions confirm their fear or create their trust? That's the real exam. That's the measure of whether an avoidant stays trapped in their cycle of retreat or finally begins to step into love. Because in the end, every test comes down to this one question. Do you trigger their fear or do you inspire their trust? And how you answer that question with your behavior determines whether love survives or whether it finally thrives. Every test an avoidant gives you is born out of fear. Fear of being engulfed, fear of being abandoned, fear of opening their heart only to watch it shatter again. But here's the truth. Fear doesn't stay permanent when it's met with stability. Fear is fragile. When you pass those tests, not with desperation, not with panic, but with calm strength and self-respect, you begin to transform that fear into something entirely different: devotion. This is the moment the avoidant doesn't expect. They're so used to people reacting poorly to their defenses, panicking, chasing, collapsing, that when someone shows up differently, it shakes them to their core. When you don't crumble at their silence, when you don't lose yourself in their distance, when you prove you can hold your independence and still love them, you disrupt the script that's been running their whole life. And that disruption is where change begins. Understand this: avoidants don't want to keep testing forever. Testing is exhausting for them too. They're not trying to torture you. They're trying to protect themselves. But the moment they realize they don't need to protect themselves from you, something profound happens. The walls they've built don't just weaken, they begin to fall. And when those walls come down, the love they've been hiding, the love they've been too afraid to give, comes pouring out. That's when the shift occurs. They stop pulling away as much. They stop retreating into silence. They begin to move toward you, not because their fear has vanished, but because your steadiness has given them the courage to love in spite of the fear. You've shown them that intimacy doesn't have to equal suffocation and distance doesn't have to equal abandonment. You've shown them that love can coexist with freedom and connection can coexist with individuality. That realization doesn't just reduce their fear, it births devotion. Think about what devotion really is. It's not just love, it's loyalty. It's not just passion, it's commitment. Devotion is love that has been tested, refined, and proven. And that's exactly what happens with avoidance. When their tests no longer confirm their fears, but reveal your strength, they start to see you as the one person they can finally give their whole heart to. Not because you forced it, not because you begged for it, but because you earned it through your grounded presence. And let me tell you, when an avoidant reaches that place, their love is not halfway. It's not lukewarm. It's not inconsistent anymore. The very same intensity that once fueled their fear now fuels their devotion. Because avoidants don't love lightly. They don't give their heart easily. But when they do, when they finally surrender, they love with a depth and loyalty that's unshakable. Why? Because they've had to cross through fear to get there. And what you cross through fire to earn, you do not abandon casually. Now, here's the part most people miss. Devotion isn't created by chasing, begging, or proving your worth. Devotion is created by embodying strength in the very moments their fear rises. It's created when you respect their need for space without shrinking your own value. It's created when you remain calm in silence instead of exploding in insecurity. It's created when you can love them without losing yourself. That's what passes the test. That's what transforms fear into trust, and trust into devotion. And devotion isn't just about them giving more to you. It's about the relationship evolving into something entirely different. It becomes a partnership built on safety instead of fear, on mutual respect instead of control, on freedom instead of dependency. That's when love stops being a battlefield and starts being a home. That's when intimacy no longer feels like danger, but like the very thing that sets them free. So if you've been wondering why an avoidant tests you, if you've been feeling frustrated by their silence, their distance, their push and pull, I want you to hear this clearly. They test because they care. They test because they're afraid to lose what they feel. And the way you respond to those tests determines everything. If you meet them with fear, you confirm their story. If you meet them with strength, you rewrite it. And when you rewrite it, when you prove love can be safe, that's when their fear transforms into devotion. That's when the very person who seemed impossible to reach suddenly becomes deeply, unshakably loyal. Because the